Let me tell you something about the smell of desperation. It doesn't smell like sweat. It smells like overcooked mac and cheese at a Christmas dinner where nobody wanted you there in the first place. My name is Christian Bradley, and the Christmas that changed everything started with my Aunt Rosemary's dining room, red tinsel hanging crooked, Frank Sinatra playing too loud, and 23 family members who hadn't seen me since I lost my job at the engineering firm 18 months prior. I walked in wearing my best blue blazer. Clean. Pressed. Head up. It took exactly 4 minutes before Cousin Asher opened his mouth. Christian. Man, you still doing that consulting thing? He said consulting like it was a disease. Laughter rippled around the table. Not everyone. But enough. I smiled. Yeah. Still doing it. My Uncle Luke, Aunt Rosemary's husband, a man who'd worked the same post office route for 31 years and considered that the blueprint for success, looked at me over his reading glasses. Boy, when you gonna get a real job? You sitting up here every Christmas looking like a charity case. And there it was. Aunt Rosemary patted my hand with this slow, theatrical pity. Don't mind them, baby. You'll figure it out. You were always the slow one to get started. The slow one. I was 34 years old with 2 master's degrees. But in that room, I was nothing but a cautionary tale they served alongside the candied yams. What none of them knew, what nobody in that room knew, was what was sitting in my phone's inbox. What was coming? But that story starts 3 years earlier. And it starts with a betrayal I never saw coming. 3 years before that Christmas dinner, I was thriving. I worked at Meridian Solutions, a mid-size engineering consultancy in Atlanta. Good salary. Corner office at 31. My name on 3 government infrastructure proposals that had been greenlit. I had a team of 12 under me and a boss named Raymond Fitch who called me his guy in every meeting. Raymond was white, silver-haired, and charming in that dangerous way where you don't realize the knife is already in your back until you try to turn around. I had also trusted my best friend, Kendrick Hamilton, with everything. We'd met in grad school at Georgia Tech. He was the best man at my almost wedding. He knew my passwords, my client list, my project notes. I'd shared everything because that's what you do with your brother. What I didn't know was that Kendrick and Raymond had been meeting privately for 8 months. I found out on a Tuesday. I walked into Raymond's office to present the final draft of the Callaway Bridge restoration bid, a federal project worth $240 million. My name was on every page. My research. My calculations. My 3 years of relationship building with Senator Douglas Hale's Infrastructure Committee. Raymond looked at me across his mahogany desk and said, calmly, like he was reading a grocery list, Christian, we're restructuring your division. Kendrick's going to take point on Callaway going forward. We think a fresh perspective. I stopped hearing words. Kendrick. My Kendrick. Fresh perspective, I repeated slowly. Raymond nodded. You'll remain on the team in a support capacity. Support capacity. After 3 years. After I built that bid from scratch. I looked Raymond dead in his eyes and I said one sentence, you'll regret this. He smiled. He actually smiled. I cleaned out my desk that Friday. Here's what happens when your best friend stabs you in the back. You don't just lose a job. You lose your sense of reality. For 6 weeks after Meridian, I didn't leave my apartment on Peachtree Hills Avenue except to get groceries. My refrigerator had hot sauce, half a block of cheddar, and leftover Chinese from a restaurant that had already closed down. That's how far behind I was. My mother, Edith Bradley, called every 3 days. She never pushed. She'd just say, Christian, baby, you eating? And I'd lie and say yes. My father, Dion Bradley, called once. He said, son, a man who sits still is a man who's already quit. Then he hung up. That was Dion. Brutal. Accurate. Devastating. I almost broke completely on a Wednesday night in October. Rain hammering the windows. I sat on my kitchen floor at 2 a.m. with a legal pad and I wrote down every single thing I knew, every contact, every federal connection, every infrastructure vulnerability I'd identified in 5 southeastern states that nobody had addressed yet. 4 pages. Both sides. Then I looked at that list and something shifted inside my chest. Something cold became something hot. They took your seat. They didn't take your brain. I started a company the next morning. Bradley Infrastructure Consulting, LLC. Registered online. $300 to the state of Georgia. My laptop, a second-hand desk from Facebook Marketplace, and those 4 pages. I reached out to Senator Hale's office directly. Not through Raymond. Not through Meridian. Directly. His chief of staff, a sharp woman named Priscilla Tran, took my call. "Mr. Bradley," she said. "Senator Hale mentioned your name just last week. Said whoever built the Callaway framework deserved a conversation." My hands were shaking. But my voice didn't crack. "Then let's have that conversation," I said. Priscilla Tran didn't just give me a meeting. She gave me an audience. Senator Douglas Hale, 16-year veteran, chairman of the Senate Infrastructure Subcommittee, a man whose handshake had redirected billions of federal dollars, met me at his Atlanta field office on a Thursday morning in November. For months after Meridian threw me out. I walked in with a printed deck, a flash drive, and nothing else. He was a tall black man, late 60s, reading glasses perched on his nose, American flag pin on his lapel. He looked at me for a long moment before he said anything. "Raymond Fitch submitted the Callaway bid last week," Senator Hale said. "Under Kendrick Hamilton's name." "Yes, sir," I said. It was missing the southeastern seismic load modeling. The section that would have flagged 3 of the 5 bridge sites as requiring reinforcement. I nodded slowly. "The section I wrote." He leaned back. "So they stripped it out. Or Kendrick didn't understand it well enough to keep it," I said. "Either way, Senator, those 3 sites are liabilities. If federal money funds that bridge work as currently proposed, 2 of them will need remediation within 8 years. That's a $60 million problem waiting to happen." Senator Hale took off his reading glasses. He looked at me differently then. Not like I was a job applicant. Like I was a resource. "You documented all of this. Every calculation. Every site assessment. Independent of anything Meridian owns." I slid the flash drive across the table. He picked it up. Turned it over in his fingers. "Mr. Bradley," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "Yes, sir." "How much of Meridian's success over the last 3 years was you?" I didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Most of it. Senator Hale didn't hire me that day. What he did was more important. He referred me. In the 6 months that followed, Priscilla Tran quietly passed my name through a network I didn't even know existed. Federal contractors. State DOT liaisons. A private infrastructure investment group out of Charlotte called Pinnacle Bridge Group, run by a woman named Dr. Celeste Odom who had a PhD in civil engineering and zero tolerance for mediocrity. Dr. Odom called me on a Tuesday morning. No assistant. Direct line. "Mr. Bradley, I've read your Callaway seismic assessment. Twice. I want you on retainer. $18,000 a month. You available?" I was sitting in my second-hand desk chair when she said that. I kept my voice even. "Yes, Dr. Odom. I'm available." Meanwhile, I heard through mutual contacts that Meridian's Callaway bid had been rejected. The Federal Review Committee flagged the missing seismic data. Raymond Fitch had to present in front of Senator Hale's subcommittee and reportedly couldn't answer 3 basic structural questions. Kendrick, from what I was told, said nothing. Just sat there. The betrayal still burned. Don't get it twisted. There were nights I'd sit in my home office and feel it move through me like a fever. The image of Kendrick smiling in meetings that used to be mine. The thought of him using my frameworks, my language, my ideas. But I had learned something on that kitchen floor in October. Anger is only useful when it's building something. And I was building. By month 9, Bradley Infrastructure had 3 retainer clients and 2 project contracts. I hired my first employee, a young engineer named Tel Briggs, fresh out of Morehouse. Smart. Hungry. Reminded me of myself at 23. I told him on his first day, "This company exists because somebody underestimated me." Don't you ever let anybody do that to you. He wrote it down. I noticed. Nobody in my family knew any of this. That's the part people don't understand. When you're rebuilding quietly, you don't announce it. You can't. Because the same people who pity you in your lowest moment will claim credit in your highest one. I had watched that play out with my cousin Asher his entire adult life, celebrating other people's wins like he had anything to do with them. My mother knew fragments. Enough to know I was okay. My father knew I was working. That was all he needed to hear. But Aunt Rosemary's house? That whole side of the family? They had a story about me. Christian, the one who couldn't hold it together. Christian, who threw away a good job for some consulting nonsense. Christian, the poor thing. That story had been circulating for a year and a half. I let it circulate. Because I knew something they didn't, the story was about to change. 3 weeks before Christmas, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. I received an email from the office of the Chief Infrastructure Advisor to the White House. The subject line was, Infrastructure Resilience Initiative, Expert Panel Inquiry. I read it 4 times. They had identified 15 infrastructure specialists across the country to participate in a policy advisory panel. My name, Christian Bradley, Bradley Infrastructure Consulting, was on the list. Based on my Callaway seismic work, which Senator Hale had apparently submitted to the Federal Infrastructure Review Board without telling me. The panel's first consultation was scheduled for December 28th. But before that, there was Christmas at Aunt Rosemary's house. I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. I thought about staying home, ordering wings, watching the game. But something told me to go. Call it divine intervention. Call it the universe's sense of humor. I went. Back to that dining room. Back to the tinsel and the Frank Sinatra and the candied yams. Aunt Rosemary's house in Decatur was packed. 3 generations under one roof, the older aunts in the kitchen, the cousins running the card table, Uncle Luke holding court in the living room like he was the supreme court of the family. I sat at the far end of the dining table between my mother Edith and a younger cousin named Brianna who was in her 2nd year at Spelman. Brianna was the only one who'd texted me genuinely throughout the year, just checking in, no agenda. The food was good. I'll give Aunt Rosemary that. But the commentary started before the blessing was even finished. Uncle Luke went around the table asking everyone what they'd accomplished that year. It was his tradition, or his performance, depending on how you looked at it. Asher had gotten a promotion at the auto parts distribution center. Luke's daughter Tamika had gotten engaged. His son Derek had bought a used truck. Then he got to me. Christian. He said my name like a verdict. What you got to report? The table got a little quieter. I could feel it, that anticipatory energy. They were expecting something disappointing. They wanted something disappointing. It confirmed the story they'd been telling. I opened my mouth. And that's when my phone vibrated. I looked down. The number was a Washington, D.C. area code. An extension I recognized from the email I'd received 3 weeks earlier. The White House Chief Infrastructure Advisor's office. On Christmas Day. My heart didn't race. It went very, very still. Excuse me, I said calmly. I have to take this. I stepped out onto Aunt Rosemary's porch. Cold December air. Christmas lights on the neighbor's roof reflecting off the wet pavement. Mr. Bradley, said the voice on the line. It was a man named David Alcott, Deputy Advisor, Office of Infrastructure Policy. I'd spoken with his assistant twice before but never him directly. Mr. Alcott, I said. I'm sorry to call on Christmas. The President's schedule has shifted. He's moving the infrastructure briefing to December 26th, tomorrow. He wants the full panel on a call at 10 a.m. and then he'd like to speak one-on-one with 3 of the 15 specialists. Your seismic resilience work has been specifically flagged. You'd be one of the 3. I leaned against the porch railing. Somewhere inside, I could hear Uncle Luke still talking. Mr. Bradley, are you available tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I breathed in the cold air. Yes, I said. I'll be there. We'll send the secure dial-in tonight. The president is specifically interested in your Southeastern Bridge assessment. He's calling it, and I'm quoting him, the kind of thinking Washington needs more of. I thanked David Alcott. I stayed on that porch for 2 more minutes after we hung up. Just breathing. I thought about the kitchen floor in October. The hot sauce and the cheddar. The legal pad. The $300 LLC registration. Then I thought about what was waiting for me back inside that dining room. Uncle Luke. Asher. Aunt Rosemary's poor thing hand pat. I straightened my blazer. I walked back inside. The room was mid-conversation when I walked back in. Asher was telling some story about his job. I sat down quietly, picked up my fork, and took a bite of macaroni. Uncle Luke looked at me. Everything okay? Who was that? I took my time chewing. Set my fork down. Looked at Luke directly. That was the White House, I said. The President's Infrastructure Advisory Office. They've moved my briefing to tomorrow. I'll be on a call with the President at 10 a.m. Silence. Not the polite kind. The vacuum kind. The kind where a room full of people all try to process the same information simultaneously and none of them can. Asher laughed first. Short. Nervous. The President. Of the United States, I said. Simply. Aunt Rosemary's mouth was slightly open. Uncle Luke's reading glasses were frozen on his face. My mother, Edith, set down her glass of sweet tea very slowly and looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. Vindication. Baby, she said, just barely above a whisper. I'm one of 15 infrastructure specialists selected for a federal advisory panel, I continued. Calm. Measured. Like I was presenting to Senator Hale. We're advising on a $4.7 billion infrastructure resilience initiative. The President specifically requested one-on-one consultation with me based on my seismic bridge assessment work. Tamika, Luke's engaged daughter who'd barely acknowledged me when I walked in, said, Christian, I didn't know you were doing all that. You never asked, I said. Not mean. Just true. The table shifted. I could feel it, the physics of power realigning right there over the sweet potato pie. Uncle Luke cleared his throat. Well, that's something, Christian. That's really something. He nodded slowly like he was the one who'd believed in me all along. I watched him do it. Watched the rewrite happen in real time. Asher had gone quiet. He was staring at his plate. But here's where it got complicated, and I want you to understand this because this is the part that matters most. Kendrick Hamilton showed up. I hadn't known he was coming. Apparently, Kendrick had dated Tamika briefly 2 years before and had stayed loosely connected to this side of the family. Aunt Rosemary had invited him without telling me. Or maybe she'd forgotten. Or maybe, and this is what I believe, she thought it wouldn't matter because in her version of the story, I was still the poor thing. He walked in through the back door with a bottle of wine and a smile, and he stopped cold when he saw me sitting at that table. I looked at him. He looked at me. 3 years of friendship. The best man speech he'd given at my rehearsal dinner. The midnight phone calls during grad school finals. The moment I realized he'd taken everything I'd built and handed it to Raymond Fitch. All of it passed between us in about 4 seconds. Christian, he said. Kendrick, I said. The whole room could feel it. Even the cousins who didn't know our history could feel it. That electric, terrible recognition between two people where something real and broken lives in the space between them. He sat down at the opposite end of the table. And then he said the worst thing he possibly could have. Kendrick sat down, poured his wine, and said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I heard about the White House thing. Senator Hale's office moves fast. He paused. I actually submitted a proposal to that same panel, you know. Didn't make the cut. He said it like a compliment. Like he was being generous, acknowledging my win. But I heard what was underneath it. I was in the same race. I just lost. Uncle Luke nodded at Kendrick respectfully. You work in the same field, son. We used to work together, Kendrick said pleasantly. Christian was on my team at Meridian. On your team. I set my fork down. Kendrick, I said slowly. I want to be accurate here, since we're among family. I looked around the table. Kendrick and I were colleagues at Meridian Solutions. The federal infrastructure work that got my name in front of Senator Hale, the Callaway Bridge seismic assessment, that was a project I built from the ground up. When I left Meridian, Kendrick took over the project. The Federal Review Board ultimately rejected the submission because the seismic modeling I'd done was removed. Dead quiet. The White House panel invitation came specifically from that original work. My work. Kendrick's smile stayed on his face, but something behind his eyes changed completely. That's one way to tell it, he said quietly. It's the accurate way, I said. Brianna, my Spellman cousin, looked between us like she was watching a documentary. My mother Edith reached under the table and put her hand on mine. Not to stop me. To steady me. There's a difference. Kendrick drank his wine. Said nothing else. And right then, right in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The betrayal had never been about the job. It had been about the fact that Kendrick, somewhere deep down, had never believed I deserved what I'd built. And now he had to sit across from the proof that he was wrong. The rest of Christmas dinner was quiet in that particular way that happens after something real has been said out loud. Luke made a few attempts to change the subject. Football scores. The weather. Whether Tamika had picked a venue yet. But it kept falling flat because the air in the room had fundamentally changed. After dessert, Aunt Rosemary's peach cobbler, which I ate slowly and deliberately because it was excellent, Kendrick excused himself. He hugged Aunt Rosemary. Shook Luke's hand. Didn't look at me when he left. The door closed behind him. Asher leaned across the table toward me. His voice was different now. Softer. Almost genuine. Christian, for real, I didn't know all that was going on. I was just talking, man. I didn't. I know, I said. And I meant it. Asher wasn't malicious. He was just someone who repeated the story he'd been given. Aunt Rosemary came and sat beside me after Luke moved to the living room. She was quiet for a moment, folding her napkin in her hands. Christian, she said finally. I said something earlier. About you being slow to start. She stopped. Started again. That wasn't right. I shouldn't have said it. I looked at her. This woman who'd known me since I was 4 years old. Who used to make me plates to take home because she knew my mother was stretching the grocery budget. Who actually loved me, in her limited, careless way. Aunt Rosemary, I said, I need you to know, I was never slow. I was building something real, and real things take time. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. Brianna caught my eye from across the table and gave me the smallest nod. My mother squeezed my hand once. Let go. Outside, it started to rain. The call with the president happened at 10 a.m. on December 26th. I sat at my second-hand desk, the same one I'd bought off Facebook Marketplace 18 months ago. In my home office, laptop open, legal pad stacked beside me, coffee going cold in my favorite Georgia Tech mug. The secure dial-in connected. 14 other specialists from across the country. Engineers. Urban planners. A hydrologist from Louisiana. A woman from Seattle who'd spent 12 years mapping fault lines. And then the president's voice came through. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by saying, the work in this room represents exactly what this country needs right now. People who look at broken systems and figure out how to fix them before it's too late. When he addressed me specifically, when he said, Mr. Bradley, your southeastern seismic analysis is the kind of forward thinking that should have happened a decade ago, I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like crying. I'll be honest with you about that. Not because I'd arrived somewhere, but because I remembered every night I almost gave up. The kitchen floor. The hot sauce. Asher laughing. Luke's verdict face. Kendrick's smile that didn't reach his eyes. Aunt Rosemary's hand pat. The poor thing. I thought about Tel Briggs at his desk at Bradley Infrastructure, who came in early and stayed late because he believed in what we were building. I thought about my mother's voice saying, you eating? 3 times a week for 6 months. And I thought about something my father Dion said to me when I called him Christmas night, the first real conversation we'd had in months. He picked up on the second ring. "Dad," I said, "I want you to know, I didn't quit." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know, son. I always knew."